It's not every day that we get to speak with athletes who are breaking new ground, especially one who is going to be in a sport that's been newly added to the Winter Olympics. Joining me now is Cynthia Appiah. She's a Canadian bobsledder. Cynthia, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, first of all, how are you doing? I know we're all living in a new world with this health crisis. How are you doing?
Physically, I'm doing well. Mentally, I'm also doing well. It is getting to a point where the frustration is starting to set in. As an elite athlete, we're used to training 4 to 5 days a week, and with the restrictions that are necessary to overcome this pandemic, with the restrictions that are in place with fitness centers and now with parks here in Toronto, it's getting more and more difficult to find a place to exercise and maintain my strength outside of where I live in my living or in the living room that I pretty much do all my other workouts in. So I'm just taking it day by day at this point, and hopefully sooner than later we can, move past this point and kind of get back to normal life.
As a Team Canada athlete, obviously, you're probably hearing from your colleagues and friends who were getting set to go to Tokyo 2020 for Summer Olympics. What have you heard from them, and what are your feelings on everything that's taken place with postponing the Olympics?
So prior to the announcement of the postponement, there was a lot of nerves. I'm fortunate enough to train alongside with some of Canada's track and field athletes, and talk with them on a daily basis or bi-weekly basis. And a lot of them were saying how they felt kind of nervous and not really sure with what's going on. They had heard rumors on their end, and they were just hoping to get some definitive answer as to what's going to happen. It's hard as an athlete when there's uncertainty to put a pause on your training or to continue training full out because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or a month from now. So now that there's been a definitive answer in that there is a postponement of at least a year for the Tokyo Games, I've seen it for online and in person. A lot of them are breathing a sigh of relief because now they know, okay, I can take a little bit of a break or I can restructure my schedule now so that I can peak again for next year. There is obviously a lot of disappointment. When you're dealing with athletes, you're dealing with athletes of various who are at various points in their careers. Some of them are just going for their first Olympics. Some of them were planning on using these Olympics as as their last hurrah, their swan song. And some of them are, looking for redemption from the previous games. Maybe performances weren't as high as they wanted them to be. So a lot of disappointment on that end, but I know, as Canadian athletes, we're resilient, and I know they are just as much. So they're going to find a way to break through this and persevere and conquer.
I like that word that you use, resilient. Looking at your bio and just your journey as a bobsledder. Can you talk to me a little bit about what resilience means to you? We know you went to PyeongChang as an alternate, and then you took some time off. So can you talk about resilience and a pause, and then just sort of what you're doing now?
Yeah, so my path to the PyeongChang Games looked pretty straightforward, and things happened that were beyond my control. And unfortunately, I was named as an alternate for the PyeongChang Games. I shouldn't say unfortunate because I did get the opportunity to go and I learned so much going there, but it definitely put a damper on things for me. And it took some time after coming back from Korea to really decide whether I wanted to go back into this realm again. I had one foot out the door and I was convinced that that was it for me. And I'd done all I could, and maybe this just wasn't it. And I needed to get on with real life. But I spoke to some people that I hold near and dear to my heart and who I trust more than anything when it comes to sports. And they convinced me to stay. And it's a hard decision because it's being a Canadian athlete or just being an amateur athlete overall is not a lucrative business. It's not something you get into because you're looking to make money out of it. You really need to be in it wholeheartedly for the pure joy of competing for your nation and for the love of the sport. So I was at that point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to be making money off of this. I know that. And I knew that coming into it. Am I really ready to commit another 4 years of hard work and tears and sweat to hopefully, get another shot at this dream. And that was something that I was willing to make after some time, of really thinking about it. But I knew it couldn't be in the role of being a brakeman again, which is the original role that I was in. I knew I needed to switch things up. So I made a decision to at least try driving. And so every year or every few years down in Lake Placid, New York, there is an international driving school that's put on by the Bobsleigh Federation, the International Bobsleigh Federation. And I just decided on a whim that I was going to try and see if I, had a knack for it. And I had a lot of fun. Everyone's there. We're all learning. We're all making mistakes. And I think that put the pressure off to, not be perfect. And so once that camp, it was a 3-week camp. Once that camp was over, I really sat down and thought about it because in addition to coming back, that's one thing, but the financial strain is even more when you're a pilot. As a brakeman, there's not that much of a financial commitment that you need to make as a pilot. When you switch to being a pilot, you're on your own for equipment, for tools. There's so many things that come into it. And once I made that decision that I was going to come back and that I wanted to become a pilot, that was it. I was set. And it just put a new perspective on what I can do. And it really showed me who I could be because, again, I could have walked away from it all and said, you know what, I'm throwing in the towel, that's it. But to come back from such a devastating scenario and come back, more determined, stronger, and having this attitude of, I'm going to put in my best effort and there's no one that's going to stop me. That, showed me the resilience that I had in myself that I didn't even know I had.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Monobob. What is that?
So Monobob is a brand new event that's just been introduced to the Olympic program. It'll make its debut in the Beijing 2022 Winter Games. So basically what it is, it's a one-person bobsleigh event. Traditionally, bobsleigh has been either 2-person or 4-person. With 2-person, you have a driver, you have a brakeman. In 4-person, you have a driver, 2 crew people who sit in the middle, and then a brakeman. With Monobob, all those roles get condensed into one. And so as the driver, you are also the pusher, you're also the brake person at the end. So it's a very unique sport. It's initially been used more so as a training tool when people are switching in from brakeman to piloting or wanting to just learn how to pilot. It's been used on the youth program and has been used for the Parabob program, and it's now being added into the women's program. So it's an interesting sport. I'm loving it so far. It's got its challenges. It's similar to 2-person bobsleigh, but there are different aspects to it that make it much more difficult. But I'm excited to drive it, and I'm excited to see how it comes out for during the Olympic Games for the mass media.
I read a quote that you said, and it was about, when you're doing Monobob, all of your success, the training, it all relies on you as that one person, as opposed to if you're with 4 people or 2. So, do you think that's going to help you to be a little bit more competitive, or give you an edge, or so why did you resonate with just that being, I'm the only person, I've got to everything's got to rely on me. How did that intrigue you?
Coming from track and field, as much as track is a team sport, it is also an individual sport. And I was a thrower, so I did shot put and hammer. And you rely on yourself. All the successes are on you, but all the failures are also on you too. It's something that it can intrigue anyone who's come from that sport and come into a team sport like bobsleigh and 2-man and 4-man. Now to go back into it, it's just like a whole different ball game. One of the unfortunate sides of bobsleigh is sometimes, the buck can kind of get passed around where, who do you blame if something goes wrong? And not necessarily who, but what do you blame? Sometimes you can blame equipment. Oh, I don't have the best sled. I don't have the best runners or whatnot. With Monobob, and one of the things that the International Federation has really been strong on is making sure that all the equipment is the same. So everyone gets the same sled, same setup, same runners. So it really comes down to the individual in the sled. You can't blame, well, I had, my runners weren't as good, or my sled wasn't as good. They've really tried to standardize the event, and, as best as they can. There are some things that can happen where you may feel like the standardization isn't up to par, but they've done a really good job in trying to mitigate situations ahead of time and be proactive in that sense. But again, it comes down to you as the individual in that sled. You know, if you push fast and you drive well, you'll be rewarded at the end. If you make a single mistake, it is exponentially worse in the monobob. In 2 men and 4 men, you can kind of get away with making little mistakes here and there within reason. Within monobob, if you make a mistake, it's really hard to rein it back in and give yourself that advantage that you gave yourself. And so that challenge is what makes it interesting.
You know what I like about the Olympics when, we are seeing the games when they come every 2 years, every 4 years, is we see the diversity of so many different female athletes from around the world. But then, the Olympics is done and we see the stats that less than 4% of media coverage, traditional sports media coverage is women. I mean, less than 4% is not good. So how are you hoping the industry, the sports industry, would showcase, more of an inclusive view or representation of women in sport?
I think it's slowly getting better. I think one of the examples I can think of right off the top of my head was the promotion and the focus that was given to the Women's Soccer World Cup last summer, or I believe 2 summers ago. That's unprecedented for me. I mean, I don't think that would have happened, maybe even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. There is a slow change towards putting more of a focus on women in sport. It could be better. I think one of the other things that I've seen is with a lot of these sports channels, you're seeing more and more women sitting at these panel tables discussing sport. I think there could be more in terms of adding to that, but it is slowly changing the discourse in terms of like, well, women's sports isn't fun to watch. It is fun to watch. It's just, finding a way to get people convince them that women's sport, or just sport in general, regardless of who's playing, is interesting to watch. It's fun to watch. You're going to get the same excitement watching men's traditional sports, or I shouldn't say traditional sports that are where right now the focus is on men. You could switch the focus onto women. You're going to get the same excitement.
I like that you said that, because there are statistics that show men like watching women's sports. It's not really about the gender, but it's about the fact that they're talented, and we have so many talented Canadian athletes like yourself. So hoping there'll be more platforms for people to get connected with you and to see all the great things that you're doing. How are you using your platform and your voice to inspire or empower young girls?
So one of the organizations that I'm so proud to be a part of is called Fast and Female. It was started by, I believe she was a biathlon athlete. And so she kind of noticed, the statistic that we've all come to, unfortunately come to know, is that beyond middle school, the drop-off rate of girls who stick with sport, whether recreationally or, some type of physical activity, drops exponentially when you compare them to their male counterparts. So she has created this organization to kind of bring focus onto that point and to try and encourage women and young girls to stick with physical activity. It doesn't have to be sport. It doesn't have to be, a recreational, you're playing soccer, or you're playing this or that and the other. It could be ballet. It could be, kickboxing at the gym. As long as you're staying physically active, that is crucial in your health and well-being later on in life. And so being a part of that organization and going across Canada and, speaking with young girls and young women and convincing them, or, encouraging them to stick with physical activity in some capacity is so fun. It's so rewarding. By the end of the day, you can see that their attitudes towards physical activity has changed, and you hope that, that stays with them.
One thing I read about you is that outside of your athletic, training and interest, and you being, a bobsledder, is that you really like Jeopardy. So that's one thing we both have in common. My
Okay.
husband and I watch Jeopardy. And one other thing is I actually met Alex Trebek.
Are you serious? Oh my God,
I
that's
did.
like
Yes, I was living in Ottawa for a couple of years, and I met him because he came back to the university, I believe the University of Ottawa, to speak.
Mhm.
And I don't even remember how I ended up getting tickets, but I was there. and I heard him speak. And by chance, I had left at the end, and I went down an elevator, took an elevator, went down a set of stairs. And as I was coming out from where I was, he was there,
Oh
signing
wow.
autographs from a few people who I guess figured out that he had gone down that same area, but it wasn't a big, big crowd. And I said, do you mind taking a picture with me? And he was so kind. He didn't, it wasn't that celebrity thing like, do you know who I am?
Yeah.
He took a photo with me, so I'll send it to you after our
Oh my
interview.
goodness.
6 degrees of separation
Yay.
between you and Alex. But how is that going? So you think you really want to get on the show one day?
I really do. I should study a bit more because it is very skewed towards American history, and that's not something I studied, obviously, as a Canadian. There's just so many American centric things that the show focuses on that if I were to make a real good attempt at the show, I would have to brush up on. I have tried the online test several times, and my score outside of the American history sections is really good. But then that's where, I know I'm losing out on. I would want to do it hopefully after the 2022 games, really put a lot of focus into training, because it is training, I would say, into learning these different facts. But it's such a weird thing. I don't even know what started my fascination with trivia. But in elementary school, we had something called W5H, which was like trivia in teams of four. Once I got to high school, I did reach for the top, which if I could go back to high school for just one thing, it would be that.
All
It
of
was
us,
just
all of
so
us.
much fun. Yeah. Again, you played in teams of four. This time we went and faced other schools, which, that competitive as just, sets the tone for everything. And even now, whenever we're on tour and I get a chance to watch TV, and if Jeopardy's on, like all bets are off. No one gets to touch that remote control in the room. I'm watching Jeopardy. And it's funny hearing my teammates say, like, how do you know those things? Like, where do you even study? And I'm like, you don't really study for Jeopardy. I know sometimes once I hear a small factoid, it kind of gets like
You
banged
tuck it
to
away.
exactly. And then, for some reason it stays there, but other pertinent information just comes out the window. But yeah, like Jeopardy is my second goal in life after the Olympic Games, is to try and get on a show. Hopefully not embarrass our nation, because I would be there as the sole Canadian. But hopefully make a good run at it too.
Well, I've seen a few Canadians on the show, and there's no stopping you. You have
Yeah.
been, you switched from track and shot put to bobsleigh. You're, so successful in the sport in terms of trying new things and pushing yourself. So you never know. One day, Monobob and your name being associated with Monobob could be a question on
It could,
Jeopardy,
I
right?
know.
Thank you so much for telling us your story. You seem like you're really focused on your training, even though you're not at the facilities, training at home and trying to stay positive and supporting your other colleagues who are getting ready, hopefully, to go to the Summer Olympics once it resumes. And then the Winter Olympics in 2022. Good luck with everything. I hope more people hear your story. And thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much again, and thank you for having me. This was so much fun to do. Thank you.